All right, so it is now 10:30. We shall begin. Please note that this session is being recorded. So, Stephanie. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on inadequate lockout tagout continues to be a top risk. Now, what? My name is Julia Locke. I am a risk assessment and root cause analysis consultant at WSPS Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. I'll be your host as well as a presenter today. So before we begin, I would like to introduce our speakers as well as myself to every single one of you in the group. We have over 100 people right now, and there are still more people coming in. So we're very excited to have you here. So, I am a seasoned Canadian registered safety professional with over 15 years of experience across healthcare, manufacturing, and service sector. So, prior to WSPS, I worked as a registered healthcare professional in independent healthcare facilities specializing in quality management as well as infection prevention and control. And joined here today, I have Stephanie Smith. Stephanie is a senior health and safety consultant at WSPS. She is a CRSP as well as an environmental professional with almost 20 years of experience in health and safety and environment, specifically in manufacturing. She began her career in automotive and aerospace manufacturing, focusing on program development, management systems, hazard control, and more specifically, logout tagout program implementation in a fast paced environment. For the recent 5 years, she has worked at WSPS on hazard assessments, compliance audits, logout tagout programs, as well as logout tagout placard development. So before we begin, I would like to go over some housekeeping for the webinar first. Number one, your computer audio is best for this webinar. Your mic will be muted throughout this webinar and you will not have the ability to turn on your camera. And last but not least, you'll be able to use the chat feature for all your comments and questions. So feel free to fire out your questions on the chat. So, as I mentioned, you may send your questions to us at any time during the session throughout with the chat feature, as you can see in the picture. So let me show you, like right here, you should be able to see the chat feature. But we will also have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation for additional questions. You also have the option to focus on content of the presentation in full screen mode. The full screen option is available in the More Actions menu, the three dots right there, and showed in the picture. And more importantly, we'd like to make the session as interactive as possible. So we've added some poll questions throughout the session. Poll questions will appear on your screen and or in the meeting chat. If you have difficulties with the technical stuff during the presentation, please send a message in the chat box. If you cannot access the chat, please respond to the meeting invite email that you receive from Safety Connections. Just like that. And then copyright. And just to reiterate the goals for Safety Connections, our goal is to stay in touch and virtually connect with industry peers to provide an opportunity to attend from your personal space. We're here to facilitate an exchange of best practices within a variety of sectors and organizations. And more importantly, we're here to learn, share, and discover what's of value to you. So without further ado, let's begin on today's session on our topic, which is on Number one, the overview of the food manufacturing risk assessment and root cause analysis project results from 2022 to 2023. And then we'll also talk about the improvement opportunities for effective lockout tagout. And then last but not least, more importantly, the resources that that comes along that we can supply you and support you with. So let's begin. I know we have over 100 people in the room right now, but I'm going to send out this poll. So Emily, if you can help me pull out this poll. Are you familiar with the risk assessment and root cause analysis project in the food manufacturing sector? So yes or no? I just want to gauge if any of you guys know. So give it a minute. No. It seems the majority of you guys are unaware of it, which is fine because that's why we're here. We can close a poll. Thank you very much. So this is an initiative that initiated in 2013 by the Ministry of Labor at the time, and now is Ministry of Labor, Immigration Training, and Skills Development. So for the recent years, all the health and safety associations have taken on this initiative. We call it the integrated risk management approach methodology to basically work with our high risk industries within like the sectors that we serve. For WSPS, it is manufacturing, agriculture, service sector. Initially, it's a two-part process. Consists of two different workshops. The first workshop is on risk assessment. The risk assessment for the food manufacturing industry, which was identified as a high-risk industry from stats, were selected, and a group of 10 industry SMEs. When we say industry SMEs, we're talking about workers and people, management people from the workplaces in this industry were recruited to come together to assess and identify hazardous events that keeps them up at night. So that one day workshop that happened in October 2022 had 60 hazardous events that were evaluated. And by the 10 industry SMEs, together they ranked the risk, and then they have identified top 10 health and safety risks in food manufacturing. So if you hover and click on this poster, it will take you to the link if you're interested in the top 10, what they really are. This should give you a link issue. You should be able to access it. But you can see the number one, the inadequate lockout or improper lockout tagout of equipment, was actually selected by the group to proceed onto a further dissection into why people are seeing this as a top risk. So that we actually move forward to the root cause analysis. And I know most of you guys have actually selected this session because you kind of know what lockout tagout is. But just to reiterate, lockout tagout is essentially a safety procedure used to ensure that dangerous equipment is properly shut off and not able to start up again prior to completion of whether it's maintenance, repair work, and or when operators are unjamming stuff. So it is a control to protect workers from getting hurt. So while a lot of you guys may not know, the project, our RSA project, but are you aware of any OHS legal provisions in Ontario on lockout tagout? Trying to gauge our understanding of the peer. Hmm. Do you have a very mixed crowd here? I'm going to give it a second to see where things are. You can probably see the results as well live right now. We do have over 100 people, so. So it looks like there are, well, of the 99 responses that we get, thank you very much for your response. Majority of you guys are aware there are legal provisions, and then, about 18% of you are unaware or don't know what they are. And here are the legal provisions. We do have them. So Steph, being the expert in this kind of area, what are the major legal gaps that we're currently seeing?
So, can everyone hear me okay? I'm just making sure. Okay. Um, so right now in Ontario, our legislation, there are some gaps even in our legislation. Our legislation is not very prescriptive. So besides when we look at the duties of employers and supervisors and it says due diligence, do everything reasonable. When you look at OREGA 5.1, there's actually not a lot of detail in there about how to do lockout tagout or how to develop your program. Basically, what it's saying is you need to lock out. If there's any hazardous motion that can hurt somebody, it needs to be stopped and blocked. And if that machine can start back up, it needs to be locked out. Now, if you look at other provinces across Canada, our legislation differs quite significantly. If you go to looking at BC or even Manitoba, their legislation is a lot more prescriptive, especially BC. They go into significant detail about what needs to be in your program, looking at other means of control, even about if you were to unplug a piece of equipment, like you've got a cord plugged equipment, you unplug that and it's in your control, that then you could do work on that machine as long as it's fully in your control. Ontario does not have those provisions. It says lockout. Even in the States, you look at the US, they've got a lot more detail inside their laws as well. So unfortunately, when it comes to Ontario, ours is just very basic of you have to lock it out. You have to stop, block it, make sure all hazardous motion has stopped and lock it out. So that is where we are seeing current gaps in our legislation.
Thank you very much. So before I reveal the results for the, why there people, inadequate lockout tagout continues to be a top risk identified from the food manufacturing focus group. So why don't we just use the chat? This is not a poll, so so we can ignore the poll. Sorry, guys. But can we use just a chat to give me what's your thought on the main reasons for inadequate lockout tagout, in your opinion? From what you know, like people are not using it, they don't know about it. What was the main driver for not doing it properly? So we have training, people takes too long, complacency, lack of understanding, cumbersome time, not emphasis. The chats are going really fast, so I'll try to read it as fast as I can. Yeah, not training, looks like shortcuts, time, complicated, people are in a hurry, laziness, supervisors, lack of a program, rushing to get back in production, just lazy. Nothing has happened before. Yeah, that mentality, right? It can't happen to me. Not follow procedures, don't see the necessity, lack of supervision, setting up troubleshooting, lack of steps. Okay. So Darren had a thoughts from auto manufacturing. Takes time to complete it, trying to get it faster, complexity. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, sometimes it's not recognizing the hazards. Very good. So to reveal, thank you very much for all your participation. It was really fast. So I love those. So the group were at, similar group of participants actually pulled together again in February 2023 to go on to the root cause analysis workshop. So the workshop is a 2-day event. The first day of the event is to literally do root cause analysis on why there is inadequate lockout tagout in the industry. Why is this still an issue? And a second day is specifically for brainstorming how can we fix the problem that we identified. So similar to the other posters, so this poster has a link to the top 10 causal factor. If you want to read it in detail, you can click on the link. So there were 32 identified primary causal factors that were identified throughout the root cause analysis process by the group of 10 people and the SMEs. And then off the 10, they identified the top 10. The top 10 are listed as number 1, leadership commitment, which was basically, I think, the supervision also listed in the group chat. Number 2, lack of procedures and program. Number 3, inadequate training. Number 4, low risk perception, acceptance of risk. Also, somebody had mentioned it. Number 5, rushing. Number 6, procedures not being followed. Number 7, inadequate monitoring and enforcement or inadequate lockout tagout devices used. Number 8, lockout points not being accessible. Number 9, inadequate procedure. And number 10, inadequate metrics such as production time, production rate, downtime, financial growth, so forth. So the top 10 have been identified. Obviously, we know what are the main contributing factors. These are the main causes for inadequate lockout tagout in the industry. The second day together, they actually brainstorm on these top 10, what should we do? How can we fix this? And the focus is really on, what can the companies do right away, as well as from a system standpoint. When I say system, I do mean what can the Ministry of Labor do sorry, they are MLITSD, but I also refer to them as Ministry of Labor. What can the ministry do from an enforcement standpoint? How do they support? What can WSIB do? What can the HSAs, Health and Safety Associations like us, WSPS, can do to support employers to do the right things? And what they actually came up with, which we did provide a toolkit, which is on this right side. So you want to click onto it. It's a free tool for download. It's a one-stop shop where you click onto it and it gives you all the resources on the right to click on. There were 5 main themes that were identified from, the controls, the brainstormed controls. Number 1, the top most important one, is providing information on the importance of effective logout tagout, and hence this workshop. We do want to emphasize the importance of effective logout tagout and where people can improve upon. That's why we have this session. And the second one is really having a guide for logout tagout program and procedures, because there seems to be a lot of variations. Not a lot of people know what should be in place. In addition to that, the training aspects, effective training. So they're asking for a guide for logout tagout on effective training. What is considered effective training? How do we do it? Knowledge transfer. And number 4 is having some sort of standard on logout tagout points and devices. At least know what they are, like what they look like, so forth. And at least information resources from the HSA at a very minimum. And last but not least is enhanced monitoring and enforcement. So this is more a combo internally. There has to be supervision that comes into play. But externally speaking, the group has suggested maybe we need a little bit more blitz maybe from the ministry, or just talking about the prosecution, the injury rates, like making it known so people are aware that it is a big issue and needs to be addressed and is part of their top priority, rather than put it in the back burner because production is important. So those are the results. As I mentioned, you can click on these posters and access the link to these specific articles, and we'll also provide you with additional links to the results later on in the slide. So that's pretty much the results. So with all that said, this is my next poll. Do you have challenges with logout tagout at your workplace? So I'm not sure, yes or no, right? So we have a lot of polls. Awesome. It looks like we're done. So it looks like majority of you said yes. Some are I'm not too sure. Some says no, you have it under control. So this is a session where we will help you from those who are not sure all the way to I've got it under control. So we have listed out different things that, along the way that you can actually improve upon. So for those that are unsure, we do have a few people who have indicated that they're not sure if they have a logout tagout issue at work. So Steph, so how can we actually help these folks?
So the first step for many of you on this call could also be just talking to your account manager and getting in touch with either a machine safety and robotics specialist. So someone like myself, I also know my colleague Rob is also on the call today too. He's another machine safety robotics specialist, because we know the laws, we know CSA standards, we also know implementation. So we can work with you about identifying, is there a gap in your program? Is there a need to improve? Or even it's just having a basic conversation around health and safety. And what could you possibly do to improve your program, new technologies that are coming out as well. So that's how we can definitely help on that side, on the machine safety robotics specialists.
Perfect. And then for those, which is the majority of the folks in the call right now who've answered, yes, I have an issue, but there may be people don't know where to begin, right? So, how can we help? Why is it important that we have effective logout tagout? Do we have any case law trends and stuff for the past 5 years on it?
So if you look into case law, unfortunately with lockout tagout and lockout tagout violations and injuries, it has been consistent. There has always been injuries with lockout tagout, not just the past 5 years. You can look historically. across. However, you go into case law, it's still showing that serious injuries are occurring. There's occurring to your workers, it's occurring to temp agencies, and even contractors. We're seeing case law where contractors have also been hurt at an employer's site. So it's really important to recognize that within your lockout tagout program. How do you account for all of those workers that could be doing lockout tagout on your site or coming in contact with hazardous energy? We are seeing charge rates now upwards close to $200,000 per charge. We've seen a few of those coming out recently. Also, Ontario now has started to do something with the client compounding charges. So what they're also looking at is that if you have an incident occur at your facility, the ministry comes in and does their investigation, but they're going to look at your past history. And if they see that incidents have occurred in the past, they're now using that to even further increase the charge rates. Recently as well, Bill 79 came into place, the Working for Workers Act, which also increased the charge rates for corporations. It used to be 1.5 mil, now it's $2 million per charge. So we're seeing those increases, we're seeing those charge rates get increased over the past several years. We're seeing more and more charges coming out. So it still is, case law is showing lockout tagout is still a major problem with industries. And it's not just Ontario. You can look at it across Canada and even in the States. I was reading articles the other day saying in the States that OSHA says lockout tagout is one of their #1 violations, accounting for almost 22% of all their violations is lockout tagout issues. So we're seeing it consistently still be an issue. And why it is important is, of course, if you go into a cell and you're doing lockout tagout, but your program is very strengthened, you're going in at zero energy, the employees shouldn't be getting hurt because the energy should be at zero energy. There shouldn't be anything to harm them. And that's where we're finding it's people go into a cell, they're not, and I can see it actually in some of the stuff about people saying why lockout tagout may not be effective. People don't necessarily understand the energy source, or they're relying on a safety interlock that's been bypassed. They're relying on this quick fix thing. And unfortunately, that's where we see a lot of those injuries happen. It's the quick fixes, it's the bypassed interlocks. And it's consistently been seen for several years now that those are where our injuries are happening.
Thank you. And then we have a strategy that you proposed, right? So, the strategy all the way from understanding your risk all the way to continued improvement. Why is this strategy effective?
So as Julie mentioned before in the introduction, I worked automotive for years, parts based factories. So they are fast moving, fast paced. Downtime is critically important to us. When I went through this process a number of years ago at one of my facilities, we had to revamp our entire lockout tagout program. Unfortunately, actually, we got an order from the ministry because they had witnessed something. And when we went to look at our program, we said, let's fix it. So what we really determined to do is we kind of use this little circle chart here. And what we determined to do is say, let's fix our program. Let's look at all aspects of our program. So we looked at our current state. What did we currently have? And what were our gaps? Then we looked at the regulations. As I said before, our regulations in Ontario are not very prescriptive for how to do lockout tagout or like what needs to be in a program. So that's where we turned to the CSA standard and said, what does the CSA standard say? Because the ministry will often use the CSA standard as best practice and say that is doing everything reasonable in the workplace. So we looked at the CSA standard and we grabbed at the key points from the CSA standard for each thing, whether it was training, program, responsibilities. We looked at each one of those factors and compared our current program against that to identify gaps. We had all the key people in the room when we did this. So we had our general manager, we had our maintenance manager, our assembly manager to say what is going on. So what we were able to do is measure ourselves against those items, looking internally at our program. But what we also did was we went into our case law. So as I mentioned before, lockout tagout has always been an issue for charges. So we went into the case law and looked at what are the incidents happening, and specifically looking at each one and saying, could that happen here? Do we have similar equipment? Are we doing similar activities, relying on interlocks, bypassing interlocks, reaching in through guarding, and saying, can we picture ourselves against that and identifying that gap? And that actually helped us create this roadmap to develop a program that was more inclusive of one, the regulations, the CSA standards, and ensuring that we closed any of those gaps that we were identifying. So we built a better program that way. Also, what we identified there was we needed to have machine-specific procedures, which I will talk about in a bit, because we identified we didn't have them. We had a program, we didn't have procedures. We identified issues with our training. We had educational training, we didn't have practical training. So we identified all these gaps and we started to implement that and control all of our risks. As we started to do that, we also developed monitoring programs that we can continually evaluate. And because we started the baseline of identifying where all of our gaps were and what could be the repercussions. And we could visualize ourselves with those repercussions that we could see in case law. It really helped our management team get on board. I was actually brand new at the facility at the time, so it really helped level set us all together and say, okay, we understand. Everyone was on board. I had a great general manager and AGM who were very supportive when they saw all the risks to our system. So we developed our program, then we continuously improved our program, even to the point there were times like a year or two later, I had a maintenance manager come to me because he had heard about an incident at another facility and he's going, we have to improve because I realized that our lockup program doesn't account for if somebody is working at roof level and there's a hazard at the roof level, like the overhead cranes and the big fans. He's like, we've got to have a process now in place to fix that. So we were constantly improving our process, evaluating our process. And this kind of risk chart here showing the circle really did help us in improving that program and creating a baseline for us. And our program became really successful. We went from having multiple lockout tag violations to almost having none. And when we did have one, it wasn't me standing in front of people the next morning in a shift meeting as a health and safety person. It was actually the general manager and the AGM finding out what was the reason why. Why did that employee felt like they needed to cut the corner? What pressure was put on them? So we took it very seriously and we had a very successful program doing that. And we were high pace. We were a fast industry, just in time parts, a lot of parts flying up of the doors every day, and yet we were able to implement this successful program.
That's impressive to hear. I mean, like it is a good forum, like from a RCA standpoint, like in listening to the people working in industry, we are lacking a forum to kind of talk about success, what worked. So this is fantastic. Thanks for sharing. So as the next point, like energies, for those who actually know that they have like lockout takeout issues, we are just wondering if you are aware of like what kind of energy, select all that applies, that are currently at your workplace that have challenges on, or may not know. So Tom asked, what about others? Which one are you specifically referring to? Pneumatic. Oh, pneumatic is in there, right?
Should be. Yeah, it's the third one. I think.
Yeah. Okay, well, 94 responses. That's a good response rate, right? Perfect. 95, slowing down. So let's talk about like, the hazardous energy forms. Gravity. Chemicals. All right, Steph?
Yeah. So when we look at hazardous energy, as I said before, we revamped our entire program. We had to look at our energy forms and even the tasks that were being done inside that cell. That was another step we had to really look at what tasks are being done, what forms of energy we have. And it's really also important not just to understand what is the difference between electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic. When we talk gravity, what we're talking about is potential there. Not just looking at those, but then also how they impact each other. So often with electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, what those are creating is a mechanical form of energy. Something is moving. Now, if I turn off electrical, does that mean that that energy source, that mechanical energy source, like if it's a fan or a flywheel, immediately stops? Or does that still continue? So it's really important when we look at our hazardous forms of energy of what are they? How do they impact each other? Even if you think hydraulic and pneumatic, a lot of hydraulic and pneumatics, some can be about lifters. They lift objects up and down. If you stop one of them and you bleed off the source as you're supposed to for controlling hazardous energy sources, does that create a gravity issue that something falls? Do you need to block that falling energy source first before you turn it off? And that's why it's important that we look at all these energy sources and understand the intricacies of all of them and how they impact each other. Even thermal energy, especially in food and beverage, you have machines that may be running hot. it may take, some of them could take hours to cool down to a safe room temperature. So if you're doing that process, but you've turned off the electrical, you may not have your PLC available to determine what is the temperature of the machine now. So that's where it's really important that you have to know your energy sources. You have to know them, how they impact each other, the individualities of them. So it is quite a task to undertake, and that's why you really need to have specific people involved when you're looking at your program.
Perfect. So that brings us to our first part. Like, the first step is always about understanding where your risks are and what your risks are. And on the left, we have like, what do you need at the stage right here. And then on the right, we will have some sort of services that BSPS can offer to support you. So, just going through the list really quickly, like, what's the difference between affected workers and authorized workers? What do you exactly mean, Steph?
So when we're talking authorized workers, we're talking about the people that can do the work. They're doing lockout tagout. So it could be operators, it could be maintenance. Also, what you need to think about too is contractors. If they're coming into your facility to do work at your facility, now they're considered authorized workers as well. How does your program account for that? When we're talking affected employees, it's usually people who are in the area who are affected by lockout tagout but not doing it. So it could be visitors, other people working on machines. As I said before, when we revamped our program, we had a lot of temporary help agencies in our facility. Because we had big machinery and we viewed it as such high risk, we decided as a group that we actually didn't want our temporary employees doing lockout tagout because we just viewed it as such high risk. So what we had trained them to do as affected employees was, you're affected by lockout tagout, you're affected by hazardous energy, but you're not going to do lockout tagout. You don't go inside the cell. And we had to be very clear with those affected employees about what they can and can't do. So oftentimes what we'll see is training around the lockout tagout for authorized employees, but we may forget to train those affected employees who can't do it, because they need to also understand what is hazardous energy. They may think just cleaning off a belt on a conveyor system is a minor task, or unjamming something, not realizing that they're being exposed to hazardous energy and they should not be doing that job, or that they need to lock out to do that job. So therefore they would need to be trained. So that's where we look at the affected versus authorized employees.
Thank you. And, you talk about the risk a lot and, need to understand the types of energy, this point, so forth. Why is it important to engage a knowledgeable person from the workplace on this? And what do you exactly mean by knowledgeable person?
So a knowledgeable person, what we really mean by that is someone who knows that equipment inside and out. It's usually a maintenance person, because they are usually, well, the maintenance manager, because they're aware of the different energy sources for that machine, how they impact each other. As I said before, one energy source is usually powering another energy source. So if you turned off, like as I said before, if you turned off the pneumatic and you bled the line, is the gravity plate going to fall? They would know that because they're familiar with that equipment. So you need that person who understands that machine inside and out, also understands where the energy sources are. Are those energy sources accessible? Also, is there a secondary energy source? So sometimes we see machinery that has one energy source to turn it off, but there is a secondary source also feeding it that maybe somebody else wouldn't know. And that's why we look to that knowledgeable person. So you really should be one of those maintenance people. Now, in terms of health and safety people, we know the law, oftentimes we know the CSA standards, but we don't understand the machine itself and how it works. So that's why it really is, you want to grab that knowledgeable person who is familiar with the machinery. And sometimes you can have the knowledgeable person who's also familiar with the law and kind of tag team them together in order to make sure that your program is successful. And then also that knowledgeable person has to know what tasks are being done in that equipment. So what maintenance jobs are being done, what's the day-to-day activities. So they need to be familiar with everything that's going on with that equipment.
So it's like task, equipment, so forth, and processes needs to. Okay, awesome. And I mean, we have services that will support people to understand their risks. And then we have listed two of them, the Hazardous Energy Control Program Assessment, as well as general consulting. What's the difference between the two and who may benefit from it?
So when we talk about a program assessment, that that is often the person, sorry, so Rob posted something. So we talk about program assessment. What's often done is that we come in and evaluate your program against CSA standard legislation, and we're looking for gaps. Is there something that we can identify where maybe there is a gap against the program? Maybe something can be improved. When it comes to what we call a building block assessment, a building block program is that's if you don't have a program right now. We can offer you one of those programs. It's sort of ready-made against what the law and CSA standard says. It's a basic program. It can be adapted by a consultant to meet your facility's needs. But then we also have something that we actually call full program development, where you'll have a machine specialist such as myself or Rob come in and create a program that matches CSA standards, that we work one-on-one with you for quite a number of hours to say, how do you do group lockout, tagout? Who's your knowledgeable person? What are the roles and responsibilities? So we make sure that we have all of that when we're doing those program developments.
So you brought a very good point, because our next step is on the program, the second step, having the proper program in place, right? So we have programs, we talk about procedures, and often people interchange the word program and procedure.
Mhm.
So why is it important to differentiate them? Like, what's the difference between program procedures? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when we talk about programs, the sort of your overarching document is usually a document that goes through roles and responsibilities. It talks about like group lockout, tagout, how that is done. It may include the 7 steps of what we call the 7 steps of lockout, tagout. That is not necessarily procedure. That's just the 7 steps to lockout, kind of a basic understanding of how to lock out. It will often go through other aspects as well, such as training, what's included in your training programs. It may include some general knowledge about how to like lock out an electrical source versus pneumatic, but it's not equipment specific. Oftentimes the program itself will make way for specific procedures. It'll say how those specific procedures will get done. And as Rob said too, like the knowledgeable person is the one signing off on the program and the procedures. When we look at procedures specifically, that is looking at like this piece of equipment or this piece of equipment and how you would lock that down. So what are the steps to lock at that specific equipment? Where are your energy isolation devices? And that's key. And I did see someone bring that up before, is they don't know where the energy isolating devices are. And that's why we look to procedures. If you have equipment specific procedures posted on your machines, you can go through and find, okay, this machine has electrical and pneumatic, gravity, and these are the steps that I take to lock that out or to control the energy sources. And it goes into specific steps of how to do that. Oftentimes too, it'll tell you further information about the magnitude of the energy source if you need certain PPE. So that's what we want to see with procedures.
Procedures.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then risk assessment is another one that we do offer. And that is looking at when we look at other means of controls. And that is very different than like lockout placards versus programs. It has to look into a CSA standard, look at each task that's being done inside a cell, whether it could be considered for other means of control. It's also looking at your safety interlocks, because what it does rely on is like an interlock, basically, or fortress keys. And can you do that task under that? But it has to look at each energy source. What is that risk? So it goes detail by detail. We do offer that service as well, where we go through and we determine what are the tasks of that machine. We would need to do it with a group. What are the tasks of that machine? What are the tasks of that machine? What energy sources are present? Can it be considered for other means of control, which is using a CSA standard to determine that there's 8 factors. You have to hit most of those factors. Then it looks at the safety interlocks itself. So it is a more cumbersome program, a more cumbersome group work activity that we do that determines for other means of control if it can be considered.
So what you just described is really the placard surface when we're actually controlling the risk, right?
So the one that I just described is risk assessment.
The risk assessment.
Yeah, it's looking at other means of control. So if you wanted to try to use interlock. So for often companies that have, maybe it's a lot of jams occur, that taking lockout, tagout, and de-energizing equipment to full zero energy to unjam something quickly could take a lot of time. That's where you would look to this other means of control, but you need a detailed risk assessment to do that. And there are steps to take, because you really have to prove that it is as safe as lockout, tagout. So it is another service that we do offer. Placard development is for zero energy control. So it's shutting off all energy sources, putting you into a zero energy state, which is your safest state to be in.
I mean, you bring up a very extreme good point about like when we're looking at like considering controlling the risk, right? So this is at the ground level, like, where people will be exposed to that kind of, problem. It's important, like in today's world. Yes, we in an ideal situation, a gold standard obviously is to bring it to zero energy state. But there are times at which, like, for example, the quick unjamming or like, things that we really need to do. Like exactly what I don't know who said this, troubleshooting in other zero energy states, so forth.
Mm,
That you cannot really necessarily have time, literally time, right? Going back to, the causes, right?
mm.
Have time to actually bring it to a zero energy state and then to perform XYZ. So, or like, or let's elaborate a little bit more on other means of control and the risk assessment. I think like people here will be very interested to kind of
Mm.
hear, how does it really work?
Yeah. So that's something actually when at one of my facilities, what we did, we revamped our entire program. Oftentimes when maintenance goes in, they're troubleshooting. They have to have a source of energy on to troubleshoot, or they're teaching a robot and those type of things. So it is looking at the risk assessment specifically. And what it is you would sit down as a group, you get key people together. So you normally, like, let's say you've got your um, like assembly portion people, so people in the bakery, you have maintenance, and you sit down and you have to look at machines individually. So it is a cumbersome process. You look at your machines individually and say, okay, what tasks are being done on this machine? Then each task you have to consider, can it be considered for other means of control, which is looking for the different factors and meeting most of those different factors. So the factors, some of them are like it happens multiple times in a shift. It's short in duration. I'm forgetting all of them. I'm sorry. um, off my head, but there's a multiple factors you have to look at. And then you risk assess it from there and you say, okay, what's the risk assessment? What is that risk level? From there, this risk assessment actually pops out what your safety circuit has to be. So if you're going to use an interlock or you're going to use a fortress key, it'll tell you what
The
safety
residual
level that
risk,
has
right?
to be. Yeah, so the
Mm-hmm.
safety level has to be of that device. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, you can consider it for other means of control, but you do have to have almost like a detailed procedure and detailed task list. When I did it at my last facility, what we did was we went through and said, we looked at maintenance specifically, and we actually even went through further and we said for troubleshooting, you would lock out this source and this source. If you're doing pneumatic troubleshooting, you need pneumatic, but you can turn off this. If you need this, you can turn off this and have this. So we were actually very specific to them of what tasks could be done under that control and what tasks couldn't be done. And it also takes a lot of enforcement because you want to make sure that no one is saying, well, I can do this task with using a fortress key, so therefore I should be able to do this one. It's no, you got to look at each task that's being done. So it is very cumbersome. Where when we look at lockout placards and do that service specifically, we're looking at full zero energy. That is saying I'm taking this machine into a zero energy state. There's no energy present in that state. Everything is either isolated or blocked or bled off or controlled in some manner. So it's like the safe zone when you're going in for full maintenance activities or even housekeeping going to be in for a long period of time or even short. It's anything that can't be considered for that other means of control. When we do that service, we actually look step by step through the placard and going individually of saying, okay, this is how you lock out this one. This is how you lock out electrical. This is how you lock out pneumatics. It even goes into further detail telling you exactly how to lock that out. And that's what we want to see when we look at those placards is how do you lock out that piece of equipment? Even to the point of left-hand rule. I'm a stickler on left-hand rule, and I can say it's because at one of my facilities, we once had an issue where somebody actually was turning back on the electrical after having it disconnected. Something broke inside the panel, and we actually had an arc flash explosion. And the very first call I got from my supervisor that night was, I now know why we stress the left-hand rule and why we practice it and why we reiterate it all the time. So all of our placards said that. It also say what to do if it failed verification. That verification step is listed on placards as well. So we go through all that, as well as that's another service we offer. Even within that service, when we're doing placards, as experts, so actually I can see also my colleague Rafik is on the call as well. So Rafik, Rob, and myself, we do placards. When we're going through, if we see a gap, like we see that maybe you have a pneumatic shut off, it's only a lever type. It's not one that's a dump valve, so you can't bleed the line. It's one that doesn't have a way to verify you're in zero energy. We'll make recommendations in that placard as well and say, we recommend having a quarter turn dump valve to ensure that you can bleed off the line. We recommend having a gauge.
Mhm.
Even within those placards themselves, we make references to if, let's say, your pneumatic gauge is electrical and it's tied into the electrical panel. If you shut off the electrical, you may shut off your gauge as well. So now you can't verify zero energy for
Mhm.
that. So we will actually change up the steps to make sure that it fits your verification process to verify that you get into that zero energy state. Because now pneumatic may have to get shut off first, then electrical because of that gauge. So that's what our placard service enables us to do. And they are machine specific. They identify where all your lockout points are as well. And I know that was where someone else said sometimes you don't know where your lockout points are. The placards themselves will show a picture of the machine and they'll show where are all your energy sources on that machine. And we did that at my last facility as well. Every machine had the CAD drawing on the very front page showing where all your energy sources are. So it showed like you are here, and then it would show like here's pneumatic, here's electrical, and here's how you shut it down specifically.
Yeah, so it's more like a picture, more visual rather than word heavy,
It
right?
still has words on it, of course, down the bottom, but the first page is your visual of where our energy source is. Also, what's key and what we've started to do in our placards is even add in, they would always say the number of locks required, but we actually started adding in if you need extra things like a safety device, a lockout tagout device, a plug cover or a valve cover. We started to add that into the front page too to make sure when you're prepping to do lockout tagout, you're getting the right equipment first. And that also
Mhm.
helps to make sure that you do full zero energy lockout or you get a follow your lockout because you have the equipment to do it.
No, that's important
Yeah.
because that brings us to like, all the aspects of training too, right? Like you can have the best program, like
Mhm.
plus, all the placards in line, but like people don't know about it.
Mhm.
So there's always, a question on the difference between education and training.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on it?
So education and training kind of are two different things. When we think about education, is kind of sitting in that classroom setting, presenting what is hazardous energy, what is lockout tagout, um, kind of going through, it may go through basic of how to turn off the different hazardous energy sources, but it's more of the educational piece. It's giving the theory behind lockout tagout and why it's important. What are the risks? Where when we're talking training, that is more that hands-on training. So again, when we revamped at my one facility, we looked and we knew we had education. We had a 2-hour course that people had to sit through, but then all of a sudden we were saying, okay, you're lockout tagout trained, but they're not because we realized they actually didn't know how to lock out that specific equipment. If you have a typical operator go on the floor after doing the theory course, how do they know what energy sources are present in that machine? How do they know how to lock it out? Because even when you go through this process, you'll discover that there is lots of ways to isolate different machines. Different machines may have different isolation types and valves and everything else. So how do you do it? Which is why all of a sudden we realized we needed to do a practical training. And we're big proponents on practical training as well at WSPS, as well as in the CSA standard. It says that because it's going to teach you how to do it specifically. We actually put it on the supervisors. Supervisor's role is to give training and instruction to the workers to make sure they're working safely, and they needed to practice due diligence. So by us saying, you go on the floor with the supervisor now, and the supervisor is going to train you how to lock out that machine with the various types of machines in your area, and then have them show the supervisor that they can do it, meant that the supervisor also had confidence that his workers could work safely. So it really helped us in that way is making sure that one, our workers knew how to lock out. We even further that by making refresher training annually on practicals because we
Mm.
were so aware of how hazardous energy can be and what the repercussions were. We wanted to constantly make sure that they understood the practical component. And we viewed that as one of the most important things. And also, can they read that placard? We put placards on every single machine. Can they read the placard? Can they identify it? Can they do it to the steps? Are they doing the verification steps? So we were monitoring all of that all the time.
Awesome. So, like that brings us to like, it's a very nice segue to our next like successful step, right? The monitor and
Yeah.
evaluate. Like, you talked about the training aspect, refresher training, importance of like, regular
Mhm.
training, refresher training. Did you have an experience with like, a situation where you found success? We heard about the arc flash or left hand rule, for example, is definitely one of the ones that like you
Yes.
really need to kind of practically like, ask
Mhm.
people to check. Do you have any like, examples of how due diligence was demonstrated, like via refresher training, practical training?
Yep. So because we actually put down the practical training on the supervisors, we had the supervisors do that annually. We usually gave them a 6-week period to get all their employees done. We actually further increased that with maintenance, that we made it a task specific kind of challenge for them. Because we knew that maintenance, yes, they would go in energy on, but they would also that they could go in with energy on for troubleshooting. So what we did was we almost created a scenario for them of saying, if this scenario happens, how would you lock out this machine? So then the manager went through that with them. But also it came down to regular audits and inspections of our equipment as well. So if I was walking on the floor, because we had placards posted, we actually had different color locks for different activities. So I knew maintenance was red. I knew my machine locks for each machine was green. I could look at the machine, and if I saw someone inside, I could see where they had put their locks and what color, and I knew if it was a maintenance task or if it was under full zero energy. So we were constantly watching that as well. We had supervisors also required to go around and monitor the lockout tagout. Because we were very serious about lockout tagout and the implications of it, we had a discipline policy, unfortunately, in place as well for lockout tagout violations to make sure that they didn't happen. But even in inspections, I remember once going through the plant floor and I'm looking at a machine and looking at the placard, and I know the machine only has 2 lockup points. It has electrical and pneumatic, and I'm somehow seeing 7 locks on the machine. Anything that the employee could put a lock on, they had put a lock on. I almost described it as lockout tagout roulette. They luckily were in a zero energy state, but what we realized really quickly was this employee actually didn't understand the lockout tagout placards or how to read them. So we had to go through the training again and find out what was the cause. Was it a language barrier? What was going on? And we had to investigate that cause. And that's part of the continuous improvement process.
Awesome. And you brought us to a very important part, like, the continuing improvement, right? Why is this the most important piece of the puzzle?
So when it comes to lockout tagout, technologies are changing constantly. There's new technologies coming out all the time. So it may help make jobs easier in the future. A lot of people mentioned about lockout tagout, it takes too much time and downtime is important. So there is new technologies coming out that you can look at. That's when we use that risk assessment for other means of control. And I can see that Rafiq posted a little bit more information about that too. So we can look at that, but also continuous improvement is important because you constantly need to be looking at your machine and looking at your lockup program and identifying gaps. As I said before, I had a maintenance manager come to me and say, anytime our guys are up in the presses now, we have to make sure that the overhead cranes are shut off, that the fans are shut off. We have to look at that because we realize we have spent so much time on the equipment that we actually didn't realize some of the other controls that we maybe had missed. Also, continuous improvement is important because we need to look at verification steps. That's part of this audit system too. I remember going into one facility doing lockup placards with them, and they had a big tank full of liquid. They had a motor that turned a blade inside the tank. And so it is a confined space as well, but we were talking and they're going, yeah, so we shut down the machine like this, we turn off the electrical like this, we attach the lock, and I'm like, okay. And then we try to turn the machine back on, and all of a sudden they try to turn it back on. It should be in a zero energy state. That's that verification step, which I can't stress enough is important. The machine turned on. So we sat there and went, what is going on? Like, they were all confused. And what they had discovered by doing this continuous improvement, they actually investigated what was going on. And a few months earlier, the electrical panel for that motor had a deficiency in it that needed to get fixed. So they rewired the motor into panel number 2 for pump number 2. When the panel got fixed, they just had never gone back and reassessed to make sure that that motor got readjusted to panel number 1. So unfortunately, it was still tied into panel number 2 and live. So that's why when we look at continual improvement, you look at all of the machines and you look at your verification steps. And I've had employees tell me, well, why do I need to verify? I do this all the time. And one thing that can happen is isolation devices can fail. It's rare, but they can fail. Or maybe an energy source has been missed or something's been changed inside that machine, which is why you're continuously improving. You're continuously looking at your program and how to improve. Even when I think about training, originally when we revamped our program, we had our own training and we liked it. We realized we could do better, and we actually brought in WSPS to help with our training and saying, okay, so we have this training, but we need to do better. And then even then we actually further modified it to meet our needs of saying, okay, can we have some customization? Can you put in our program, our placards? And we were able to get a really successful training program built because we constantly looked at our program and tried to say, is there gaps? Is there ways that we can improve? And that enables us to do that. So we had a very successful one in the end.
Thank you very much. And it really highlights the importance of going in a cyclic manner, right?
Yeah.
So, by doing your evaluations, then you know where to improve upon. That's because those
Mhm.
are really where the gaps. And then you also identify a new set of risk as well.
Mhm.
So it's more like a continuous cycle
Yeah.
that will definitely help, especially nowadays. We have a lot of compounding risk, such as a lot of increased use of temporary
Mhm.
agency workers in a workplace, especially manufacturing, use of
Mhm.
contractors because things are outsourced. So these are things that, is harder for the employer to control.
Yeah.
So by adopting this, continuously looking at your own processes and continually improving on it, then it will help drive out, the small parts and, be adjusted to fit what you have, like who you're working with.
And it's also
Also,
looking if legal changes have happened or CSA standards have changed. So it's important that way too to look at your continual improvement structure about are things changing? As I said
mhm.
before, our legislation isn't as prescriptive, let's say, as BC. So it's looking at theirs and saying, okay, how do they do it? Can I mimic something that they do there as long as it meets the intention of Ontario to
Mhm.
help me improve my system? Even sharing between each other is key. So that's where you can also share. You can bring in WSPS to help as well, where we can talk about gaps or improvement ideas.
Or even like in this forum too, right? Because there
Yeah.
we have over 100 people in the room right now, like who likely have and like was told to us like they have an Lagoteco issue. Just
Mhm.
sharing best practices in this kind of forum helps. Like learning from each other's successes really matters. And to aid you, for everyone else, we obviously have different tools to support you. Information resources such as our machinery and tools resources page, these are all links. So on here, anything that's blue is a link. So you can click onto it to access it. We will also provide you with an email with all the resources at the end after the session. So up to you. But just to highlight a few things that I find interesting, part of the RARCA project, I get to talk to people who are actually working in the industry, what they're really looking for. And as part of the report, like one of the things that stand out is as part of the training, people were looking for more visual stuff, like short, easy to understand visuals. Like that, takes away that language barrier aspects of things so then people can actually learn what they're supposed to do. So recently, WSPS had a project. We embarked on a journey to provide these resources as part of the learning from the food manufacturing RARCA project to produce videos alike. So on the third bullet, the YouTube video on Lagoteca, we have a very I would think is a pretty cute animated video on Lagoteca on the 7 steps, I believe, right, Steph? Um, on what can we include. We also have the link to the YouTube video on our machinery and tools research, the first link, where you can actually access a lot of resources, not just their information on hazardous energy controls, as safety tips, or even videos that you can actually leverage and use in your workplace. We also have a link to the CSA standard control of hazardous energy lockout and other methods if you're interested to kind of read through a standard. Um, for me, standards are drier than law. So if you want, you can feel free to reach out to Steph, Rafiq. I believe there's Rob in the room as well. Ask any of the specialists. They have it like well first. And as Steph had mentioned, we do have other provinces' legislation, such as the WorkSafe BC one, as well as in the state's counterpart, OSHA, where they have more prescriptive legislation. We can definitely benchmark on it. So then, to make our workplace a little bit safer. And we also have this new thing called Ask the Experts. So Steph, going to bring you back on to talk about this a little bit more.
Um, so recently we were in a project with the ministry for manual and mechanical material handling. And through there, we have developed this thing. It's just running to the end of March, unfortunately, at the moment. But it's this idea of group consulting. Because what we realize is a lot of people have questions around hazards, around Laka Tago. And this enables people to sign up for these sessions when they run. And what it is maybe a 10-minute introduction into Laka Taiga. There's also other hazards like wrecking, machine safeguarding, pedestrian safety, and manual material handling. But it enables you to sign up and then ask your question to that expert and try to get answers. But what we're also seeing is it's a chance too that other companies also have come on and said, someone brings up a question and some other companies like, oh, we just did that. We just went through that. So it's a chance also to collaboratively share with other companies as well. So we're finding success that way too. So they're called Ask the Expert. And it's an expert from WSPS who will be on that call for an hour, and you can ask them questions. If it's further technical information you need, they can then have you reach out to one of this machine's safety specialists who can then further ask questions. But if you have questions, it's a great opportunity to just jump on and ask a question or two or get further information.
And I think it's free, right?
Yep, it's free.
It's free. And then I believe we also have like, something that's coming soon. So we're going to introduce something that's coming soon as well
Yeah.
on resources, right?
Yeah, so we have, as part of this project too, this manual and mechanical material handling you can find on the WSPS website. We had another project where we were creating resources for employers. And what we decided to do is create resources for employers, one directed for supervisors and one directed for employees. And as Julia kind of mentioned before, we decided to go a little bit more visual with some of these resources. So the employer one is targeted to the employer. What did they need to know specifically? So with Lockout Tagout, it goes over kind of the different forms of energy, where it intersects with the law, and then some basic control measures, ideas for control measures, and what should be in your program. When we look at the supervisors, what we really decided to do is create actionable checklists for the supervisors, things that they should be checking when they're on the floor. That's part of that verification, that audit system, making sure your workers are working safely, is giving them an actionable checklist to say, these are things I should be looking for. So we've created those actionable checklists, and then workers, what we've done is sort of created more of a basic understanding of kind of those 7 steps to lockout. So those are posted right now for lockout. It is the supervisor one posted and the worker one. The employer one will be posted shortly. It just is in the final stages of development. So they're just more resources that we're trying to target, make it simple, make it a little bit easier to understand. And that's our methodology with those resources. So they're under manual and mechanical material handling on our website. And again, they're
Awesome.
free resources that you can download.
Awesome. And for those who are, this, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this safety connection was actually part of the outputs, part of the ask from the RARCA project from the food manufacturing group. So if you really want to know the actual results and the tools, feel free to check out the very first link. And then the second one, we did have a dedicated food and beverage manufacturing resource page on the hazards that were identified from the risk assessment and root cause analysis project. So check that out too. There's a lot of information resources there. And as part of the output for the RARCA project, the learnings that we learned from the project, we actually fed into another project called New Canadians Project. So the objective of this project is to raise awareness of the top hazards to new Canadians and temporary foreign workers in high-risk workplaces. And the deliverables are very straightforward. It's extensive multilingual digital awareness resources, as well as hazard-focused worker content for people in these industries. So what's coming up? So coming soon. So for the manufacturing sector, what we will do is 5 mobile-friendly, simple animated videos on Lockout Tagout, struck by mobile equipment, crushed by caught in moving parts, slip, trips, and falls, and unloading and loading trailers. Sorry, my apologies. Loading and unloading trailers. To support these animated videos, we also have screen images resources together that people can use. And all these resources will be translated into 6 different languages, as we heard. From Food and Beverage Ontario and Meat and Poultry Ontario. And these resources will be available to you sometime in March, so next month. So very exciting coming up. And if you find this interesting, like
Sorry,
you want
Julia,
your
just add one more thing I forgot. Those resources that I described to you on our website, for the ones directed for workers, they will also be translated into those 6 languages as well. They're currently being translated, so I think timeline is March as well to get them up, but they'll also be translated.
Awesome. So even more resources for free. So isn't it exciting? So if you want your voice to be heard, to be part of the conversation, to drive more resources, like, how WSPS Health and Safety Associations or systems can actually help you to make your workplace safer. If you happen to be in automotive manufacturing, NICS code 336, or grocery stores, NICS code 445, WSPS is running 2 new RARCA projects for these 2 sectors. So if you're interested, let us know. Contact your account manager or email us at rarca@wsps.ca, and we'll be in touch with more information. And just to recap everything, and thank you very much for your time for today. Providing information is really key, helping people understand what they need to do, empowering the training, including the practical aspects of it, continue to monitor and enforce what you have, and constantly, continually evaluate your process and make improvement on it. And last but not least is really celebrating the successes. Like people are motivated positively. So it's important that we actually celebrate it so everyone knows. And then, of course, to wrap up really quickly, we do have some time for questions. So I'm going to answer your questions really shortly, Eric. So getting started today, these are the links to connect with consultants. So these are free forms so you can be connected to a specialist on the topic. So we have two. So machine safety and robotics consulting, we have one, as well as if you have RARCA inquiries, please email us at rarca@wsps.ca and we'll be in touch. So the last piece of question. So Eric asked, is there any plan to expand the languages for other immigrant workers? We have a lot of Nepali members, and that would be really helpful for our training. Yeah, send these suggestions to us. We'll take that up. So the 6 languages were decided based on the feedback from the industry associations, because that's the demographic that they see. But if you have additional ones, like additional languages that you see, like that is specific to your workplace, feel free to send us a suggestion, and then we'll definitely take it back to the project team, and then maybe this is something that we can do moving forward too. So thank you, Bill, for the information, and then Glenda as well. You're welcome. Any questions? Did we miss any questions? Thank you very much. I'll give it 2 more minutes. If there are no more, if there are no more questions, then obviously we'll give you 20 minutes back to your day. So will this session be shared? I think Emily will be able to answer that. Access the recording. Also, Emily will be able to do that for you. And then Emily said recording will be available on our website in a couple of weeks. So for those, this is a recorded session, obviously. So the recordings will be available in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Leave a seat.
So we have a safe entry activity that's similar to logout tagout. It is basically a program to allow for entry for cleaning machines. Safeguards are still in place, but should we be writing a policy and have a defined logout tagout safe entry program? Question.
So when you're going into that cell and they're doing housekeeping, are they going in under zero energy? Or are they going in with energy on, like using an interlock or a fortress key? Because if you're going in under zero energy, having having placards is the best way to do it. So if you're using an interlock, that's where you need to look at that risk assessment process and determine the tasks that are allowed to be done under that, and making sure that you're hitting most of the criteria. CSA standard for Z460 spells it out what criteria you've got to hit most. You got to go through that risk assessment process. It should be in writing about how to do that task safely. So it could just be that you have, I've seen it where they've had like a matrix of this task is allowed to be done under this control. This is how you lock it out. Even if you go into, sorry, even if you go into a cell and you're going in and using the interlock, how are you controlling that interlock to make sure that no one else accidentally closes that door? You still have to put a lock on it, some way to prevent that door from being reclosed and reactivated. So it is important is to have kind of stuff written around it. When we look, why we're saying written around it too is if you look under section 2 of 851, it gives examples of where maybe you have to deviate from the law and written procedures. And it says about things need to be in writing because that's how you're going to prove your due diligence. We have an interlock and normally like curtains function if activated. Yeah, so you still have to do the risk assessment because you have to determine what energy sources are being what energy sources are being isolated by that interlock and even light currents. We can't necessarily rely on safety devices. Also, what level is your safety device? Is it performance level? In category level, like what category level, what performance level is it? What does it isolate? Is there any other sources? So I forgot to mention that earlier. When we do placards and we're looking at risk assessments, we also look at what other equipment activates based on that. So when we're thinking about clearing jams of a or working on one machine, is there conveyor feeding into that's sourced by another piece of equipment? So we have to look at all of that when we look at these risk assessments and we look at placards.
So I
So it
think
is
Rob
quite
also
extensive.
added in too.
Yeah. Could be part of your main program. Yeah. So controlled entry, but if you're using safety interlocks, that you've got to do that risk assessment process. And then build it into your lockout. So we've had the same. We had the same at my last affiliate as well. We did have safe entry procedures, or what we call controlled entry, and we were very specific about which procedures, what you could do and couldn't do, how to secure that source to make sure that there was no way that it could turn on, and even verifications. Because also the big thing too, when you're remembering about interlocks and using bypasses and using interlocks, is things get bypassed. And we've seen that if you look in case law, that people have relied on an interlock and somebody has disconnected it or somebody has bypassed it. So it is really important if you're going to use that, you have to have trust in your system and make sure there is no bypassing, no anything has happened on that machine. Are there any best practices securing a power source, removing the keys from power mobile equipment? So are you talking about from mobile equipment, you're talking like forklifts and that? Yeah. So it's another story. Working in the industry too long, you get stories. We actually found out, unfortunately, in a bad way, that just removing the keys may not be enough for forklifts because they are typically key to like keys from starting up your forklift. We actually had to implement a lockout process for our forklifts. We actually bought devices, you can buy them online, to physically lock that forklift when it was broken. Or it needed repairs to stop anyone from accidentally moving into production. And it's because we had somebody do it once. A fork had been broken and he thought he could fix it. And unfortunately took it and moved it into production because he had keys to the forklift. So we actually started to put lockup procedures around our mobile equipment as well. If it was in the repair shop in our maintenance area to be repaired, there was a device put on it that prevented anyone from being able to start it up. So there is lockout devices for mobile equipment. If you look online through any of the providers for like things like lockout tagout equipment, there's a number of providers out there. They've got ones for lockout. I think the one we had was it went over the wheel device itself, but we've also seen there's valve covers you can get if you've got a propane forklift. There are valve covers you can get that go over the connection that would go into
The fuel.
the propane, the fuel.
Yeah.
There's also ones that you can get that if you've got electrical, the ones that the electrical connection to
It's a
the
plug.
battery, you've got ones too
Yeah.
that can go over top of that plug, and then you'd have a lock on there. Now, it is important to make sure that if you're doing that type of process and you have, because sometimes they call them shop locks, it may not be a personal lock on there, it may be a shop lock because it could take a while for a mobile equipment specialist to come in to fix that equipment, that you have a process around those shop locks and where do the keys go, who maintains them. Usually you'd want it like a maintenance manager who's holding on to those keys to make sure that, again, nobody accidentally takes the key and goes and puts it back into production. Any other questions? And then of course, like anytime you make an improvement on your program like that is make sure it gets into your program. That's part of your continuous improvement program. Things pop up that you discover, and that's where you then make sure that you include that into your actual program so that in the future it gets done the same way. And then you would train people on it.
Person who engages with vendors. That's a new question. So we have to get back to you, Mohammed. Thanks for participating today. We'll have to kind of check in with our colleagues on who will be that person or, what to do, especially when it's like related to vendors. So there's still people slowly dropping off.
Yes.
Any other questions? Think people Do vehicles also need to be locked out? Vehicles as in cars or as in like lifting device, like forklifts and pump trucks, so forth? Forklifts.
Forklifts. They, it depends on your program. They should be to make sure they don't go into production. As I said before, we had an incident where a broken forklift that even had a red tag on it that said do not use, the employee ripped it off and took it and went back into production with it. So because of that, what we realized is we had to implement even a further control in, and we said, we're locking these out now. It was our only ifs, ands, or buts because we had the incident occur. So that was a learning curve for us. So I would suggest it because it stops anybody from being able to accidentally take it into production. Because even though you have a warning on it, red tag, things happen. How do you prevent it from happening? You lock it out. If it's needing repair or there's equipment that's dangerous for some reason.
But give it a few more minutes to see if there are more questions coming in. Okay, Steph?
Yep.
But thank you though. It's a wonderful session for all.
Yeah. And even with the forklift things, not just looking at forklifts, like reach trucks, skyjacks, anything like that that can move. If you've got it that it shouldn't be able to be used right now because something is wrong with it, lock it out. Get those lockout devices. There's a lot of them online now, a lot of different types online, but it enables you to lock them out. Even docks are the same, like shipping docks. If you've got one that's broken, there's ways again to lock it out so you can't open up the doors. Putting signage on top of it. Like it's thinking about all the different things, not just the equipment that's running your production, that could also be in your lockout tagout program. So like overhead fans, cranes, all those things. You've got to look at all of that stuff in your program.
So we have another question. We're in.
Yep. Your program should cover all aspects of your facility. So it's not, the store is just as important. We do see incidents that occur at the stores as well. So if you have a forklift, you'd want to include it in your program. You'd want to include any sources of hazardous energy if somebody could potentially get harmed by it if they're working on it, or it's broken and you can't be using it. How do you lock it out? How do you ensure it? The same as you see it too with heaters, with air conditioning units, all those things can get locked out if you don't want people using them. Now, different trainings are needed for different sources of energy. So we didn't really touch on chemical, but like ammonia systems and that too. You may need an expert to come in to work on ammonia systems. So again, your program should be all encompassing.
I guess like what she's asking, Rebecca was asking, like, should the program also cover all sites?
Yep, all sites. Anything that falls under A51, as Rob said. So storage rooms, stores, all of the things it covers.
Yeah, I mean, like your procedures could be very specific, but then like it can be like location specific depending on what you
Mhm.
have. Because at the end of the day, is really your workplace, right? Where people work, really understanding where the risks are and the controls of it.
Yeah.
So while the mill, like feed mill production area, have maybe more extensive ones, your retail location
Mhm.
should, as long as their machines, equipment being used, then they should have the store location specific controls.
Yeah, but your program also has to account for contractors coming in and doing work as
Mhm.
well. How do you inform them about your lockout procedure? How did they know where to lock out? Because you would know your energy isolation point. So it is encompassing of everything. You can't just say, well, it's only the female. You'd want to include the retail store as well. If you've got energy, you need a lockup program in place.
Mhm. Do the operators also lock them or only me?
So sorry, you've got pumps requiring maintenance. So in your process, the person working on the equipment would definitely need to be locked out. Each person working on that equipment would need to lock it out. So if you've got two maintenance people, both maintenance people have to attach locks, or you have to have a group lockout procedure. There are times where maybe there's a piece of equipment down where it's going to take a little while for maintenance to get to it. So you may put something like a shop lock on or something, but again, your program would have to encompass how you lock out that. The operator, unless they're helping maintenance to do the work to repair the pump, they wouldn't have to do it. At that point, they should be the affected employee, unless they're physically doing it as well. Then they would be authorized.
So just going back to the tips that Steph had given out, like, when
Yeah.
we actually define a program, we really need to define who
Yeah.
are the authorized workers and who are the affected workers and
Yeah,
have that
and in
really
which
clear.
cases are what? Because there's
Hmm.
sometimes where you may be an authorized employee to do housekeeping work, to do unjamming, but you're not an authorized employee to repair a pump. And that type of thing. So it depends on your program and how you've classified and who's developing what. But if maintenance is going into doing um, any work on pumps, they would be locking out. If that operator is assisting in any manner, then definitely they're going to have to be locked out as well. Anyone going inside the cell to do the work or putting their hands inside the equipment has to have their locks on. Hopefully that makes sense.
If there are more questions, feel free to fire them away in the chat and then we'll address them. And thank you, Rob, for answering some of the questions too in the chat. That's awesome. I guess people are just leaving.
Yeah.
No, thank you for joining. Nice to have you. For those who are just leaving, have no more questions, thank you for participating, and then have a wonderful day.